Recently, we've gotten major behind-the-scenes leaks for Call of Duty Zombies, featuring the ins and outs of a ton of scrapped content, in particular for Black Ops 2 and Black Ops 3 Zombies, as a massive developer hard drive has been posted online. I've been slowly unpacking some of these topics in videos and have plenty more to come, but in this video I want to break down a few different topics as one big discussion. And I want to give a big thank you to CordLawFacts, who I will leave a link to his Twitter as well as YouTube channel in this video's description. I would highly recommend to check him out for all things Call of Duty Zombies lore. And definitely make sure to check him out, as he's going to be covering a lot more of this cut content coming up in the future. And he has very kindly gone through the hard drive and compiled a lot of this information into a script format that I will be detailing in this video. This video today will be focusing on cut features as well as lore that we didn't know from Gorod Krovi. So without further ado, let's jump into the first topic. The hidden lore of the tombstones in Gorod Krovi's spawn room. For years now, it's been speculated back and forth whether they are for Primus, whether they are something to do with Reznov. Who are these graves actually for? We just didn't know for sure. But now we do, and as implicated by the Reznov sign in the actual game, it did indeed have to do with him the entire time. And it's so awesome that we've now learnt this from these development leaks, because there's probably so many environmental details on the map that are meant to clue us into lore and backstory that we just unfortunately don't have enough pieces to put together on our own. And I think that's especially a shame when really there's probably lore that's impossible to even figure out without leaks. Regardless, let's go over it. So as we know, Viktor Reznov was first introduced to us as a character in the Stalingrad mission for World at War, so revisiting that in Zombies gave the team at Treyarch an opportunity to show us an alternative reality and what they were, whereas some of Reznov's men survived that first mission in World at War. Obviously, in that mission, you play as Petrenko. Here, instead, all of Reznov's men die, and as you can see here, the names on the gravestones were actually meant to be from left to right. Chernov, Deletsky, Kozin, and Petrenko. Gorod Krovi is a fractured timeline, where the war never ended, due to technology progressing so much so. And this shows us that yes, the campaign storylines and lore were always meant to be intertwined with the zombies' narratives, especially when we had a multiverse with many different events that would play out, such as the alternative choices and endings we have in Black Ops 2 and Black Ops Cold War's campaigns. Zombies has always been canon to the Ether's infinite universes, and this is just one of the many connections. Chernov is the guy in the campaign who actually uses the asset of what would later become Nikolai in Zombies. As we all know, all of the original Ultimus crew members are based off of character models they had used in the campaign. He's one of the more pacifistic and soft-hearted of Reznov's men and carried a diary. He was often at odds with Reznov's actions throughout the missions, but at the end, whenever he gets killed during the siege at the Reichstag, you can actually see Reznov stop and pick up his diary, stating that someone should read this, showing that he truly did care about him as a man under his leadership. But that's not all. Like I said, Chernov shares the Nikolai character model, and now that we know he dies here in the Fractures, we can now definitively state that Chernov was indeed the brother of Nikolai, who got killed in the Battle of Stalingrad before Group 935 could capture him, which is actually insane. There's also another related cipher that we'll talk about in a bit, to which the key is the word mother, implying again that Chernov was in fact the maternal brother of Nikolai, who Group 935 intended to capture as stated in the Report 44 cipher, but died at the square in Stalingrad before that could happen. And it's so cool how they're taking the parallel of the reused asset and making it make canonical sense. Deletsky is a much more minor character in World at War, only appearing in that initial Stalingrad level, but he's actually one of the soldiers who saves Petrenko and Reznov after they escape from the burning bookstore and are about to either be captured or killed by the Germans. You can later assist Deletsky during the final segment of that mission, where you are tasked with killing General Amsel. Deletsky and his men can be seen below, and he can either die or live based on your actions you take in that mission. Kozin is a character we wouldn't be introduced to until the Volkuta level in Black Ops 1. He's actually Sergei Sergei, aka the Monster of Magadan. He's the hulking brute who helps Reznov and Mason escape from the prison camp, before ultimately sacrificing himself in that level, and is crushed whilst holding up a door so the others can continue their advance. Although not a whole lot is known about him, there was a cut line of dialogue from Reznov where he states that Sergei was once a man under Dragovich's command, most likely in the very same unit that Reznov was in, but that Sergei mocked Dragovich in front of the wrong people. And for this, Dragovich himself cut out Sergei's tongue, explaining his lack of voice lines in the level, and afterwards sent him to the Vorkuta prison to rot. Finally, we have Dmitry Petrenko, the main protagonist of the World at War Russian campaign, who was there at the massacre of Stalingrad, where he joined and assisted Reznov to assassinate General Amsel, to re-linking up with Reznov once again 3 years later after he had been captured, to then pushing into Berlin, taking the city, and Dmitry himself planting the Soviet flag atop the Reichstag. There's then a follow-up mission in Black Ops 1, where just after the end of World War II, during Operation Oversakim, which is basically the Russian equivalent to Operation Paperclip, where Dragovich sent his men, including Reznov and Petrenko, to find and capture Dr. Frederick Steiner in the Arctic Circle in October of 1945. And obviously, as we all know by now, the whole thing ended in disaster. Dragovich betrayed his very own men, opting instead to test the new chemical weapon Nova 6 on his own men, placing Reznov and Dmitry inside gas chambers. And whereas Reznov was able to escape, it wasn't before witnessing his comrade Dmitry die an antagonizing, horrible death due to the nerve agent. And that all brings us back to zombies and Gorod Krovi, where instead of going off and living the rest of their remaining lives, some longer than others, as shown here, all of Reznov's men were struck down and killed during the battle at the town square during the initial siege. But it doesn't end there, as in the actual game. We also have the sign just in front of the graves where Reznov himself states his famous line, "Vengeance is mine." And now, with all of the information above in conjunction with various ciphers and timeline entries, we can now paint a decent timeline of events that led to what we eventually see in the map. After Reznov's men got killed, he swore vengeance and travelled behind enemy lines by himself, stealing schematics from Group 935 and sending them back to the Red Army in hopes that they can turn the tide of the war here in Stalingrad, before ultimately stating that he fears he won't live to see the fruits of his efforts, implying that, like his men, Reznov probably died too in Stalingrad, joining his brethren in death. Though that's just speculation based off of what V says at the end of that cipher. In either case though, his efforts did indeed yield huge results, as from reverse engineering the stolen schematics, the Soviets were able to make things such as the Raygun Mark III and the Gigant robots based off of the German Giants previously seen in Dimension 63 Origins and the Giant. This enabling them to stand a fighting chance, and instead of World War II ending in the Agonia fracture, the war is still raging on months after it had actually ended in real life, locking the Soviets and Germans in an everlasting stalemate for the Battle of Stalingrad, though eventually Group 935 bombarded the city with 115 bombs, turning everyone into zombies, leaving Nikolai 1.0 as the only survivor, still fighting on, and setting up the map for when Primus eventually arrived. This is so interesting and shows how this alternative version of the campaign ties directly into how this fracture even became what it is, and what we saw on the map. And is such interesting and integral lore that I wish the actual map gave us more clues towards, because we really only had enough information to scratch the surface, when really we should be able to figure this stuff out on our own without needing leaks to put all of this together into a bigger picture. And I think the same can be said for all of the other maps. Even in Black Ops 6, for example, the maps probably have so much lore that's only given minor environmental as well as intel details to kind of hint towards what happened, but it's just not enough to put the bigger picture together. So yeah, there you have it. We finally know who those graveyards were actually for, and are able to use that to confirm prior theories that had only been speculated on prior. Chernov was the maternal half-brother of Nikolai, and Reznov himself was able to get revenge for his fallen comrades and ensure the Soviets had the technology necessary to fight the Germans. Now moving on to the next topic. We will now now be taking a look at a scrapped mechanic once again on Gorod Krovi. So in the final version of the map, we got way back, there's obviously things like the finger trap, the laser eye trap, so on and so forth, but from recent leaks we now know that in conjunction to all of that, there was also going to be an energy system in the map to power these traps. So what this actually is something called Vril Storm Verful, which translates to Vril Electricity Cube, and we are even given a tidbit of cut lore for what it actually was. It's described as a synthetic version of Element 115 produced by Group 935 themselves. So this is a completely artificial version, I guess tying into the real life Element Moscovium, the real life synthetic Element 115, in an attempt to recreate the properties of the actual element, which before would have been in finite supply as they come from meteors in outer space sent by the Apothecans, as shown in the Revelations intro cutscene and confirmed in the official timeline. And it continues and says that as the Russians retreated, they ripped the Vril cubes out of the traps in map, leaving players to have to find out how to repower the traps themselves. The basic premise of this mechanic was so players actually had to strategize about which traps they wanted active on the map, as there would have been fewer of these cubes than actual traps in the map. And you couldn't remove the cube once it had been placed, so you would have had to be careful about which one you wanted to activate in any given match. Each player would have started with at least one Vril Storm Verful in their inventory, and in games with less than 4 players, the remaining cubes would have been divided up amongst the players to where, if there was 4 players, each player got 1, 3 players, each player gets 1, 1 player gets 2, 2 players, each player gets 2, and then if there was 1 player, the player would get all 4. An icon next to the character heads on the hood, similar to the tram tokens, which would have communicated how many cubes each player had. This method would have allowed other players to see who has cubes available, and keep the paused UI cleared for any buildables and quest items. So yeah, much shorter than the topic on Reznov, but finally we have the most interesting topic. Similarly, we have another massive cut mechanic in Gorod Krovi that is actually quite similar to a mechanic that recently got introduced in Black Ops 6 Zombies. So as we know, when Nikolai in Gorod Krovi, who Primus had been sent to kill so they could collect his soul and send it to the house in Agatha, was protected by a massive mechanized power armor suit that's quite similar to the one seen in Black Ops 3's campaign during the whole fight in the mission Demon Within. But now, thanks to the recent leaks, we know that there was actually going to be a player-controlled power armor suit, otherwise referred to in these documents as PAS, pass. This was actually going to work much similarly to the mutant injection mechanic we have right now in Black Ops 6 Zombies, where once you activated it, you would have had a very limited amount of time to kill as many zombies as you could. Now, there was actually going to be a quest to obtain this thing, which would have seen players needing to track down 4 parts around the map. It doesn't state where they would have been on the map, but these parts include a helmet, breastplate, a lightning cannon, and a missile pod. Players then would have needed to find a unique power armor crafting station, much like where you would have placed the items, to which the parts would disappear from the shared inventory system, and an animation would have played where the player starts floating in the air, and the parts shoot down from the sky bit by bit, forming a protective shield around the player, much like in the Avengers movies, where parts of Tony Stark's suit will fly to him, automatically equipping itself around him, which of course is what they used as inspiration and reference material for this cut mechanic. And I guess it's probably based on the Cheese Custom Zombies map, where you could have Iron Man suits, and lots of people when they saw that wanted this in Zombies, so I guess it was Treyarch's way of attempting to add it into the game, although it never ended up releasing. From there, you would have been given about 30 seconds to inflict as much damage as possible, but it's also said that whilst the player wouldn't take damage, being hit would instead chip away seconds at a time from the timer as it was counting down, meaning you would still have to be very careful about getting hit. The weapons at your disposal during this time, as mentioned, are the lightning cannon and the missile pods. The lightning cannon is described as being a highly accurate weapon with a high rate of fire, with damage being dealt instantly upon contact with a zombie. Unlike the Wunderwaffe, it doesn't appear that this would have included the chaining effect, but presumably it would have looked similar to when you attack a zombie with either the DG2 or Deadwire, where they would look all electrocuted for a few seconds, getting frozen in place before ultimately dying. The document also states that this would have had a 5-round capacity, and a quick reload speed. The missile pod, on the other hand, is described as being a burst fire weapon, which when shot, fires 3 miniature rockets that arc and land at different ranges away from the player. It sounds like this would have been especially good for taking out a massive horde at once. The ranges are described as being short to mid-range, and the rockets would have exploded on impact. And once all 3 rockets would have been fired in a single burst, the weapon is said to have had a long drawn-out reload like an LMG. Visually, it's said that the arm of the player, which had the missile pod attached, would have resembled the early prototype of Hydra missiles in real life. That's not all though, as the power armor would have also included a rocket punch attack, which would have worked as a throwable like the Hell's Retriever in Mob of the Dead, boomeranging. This could have been used to kill zombies, pick up power-ups from afar, and there would even be certain walls around the map that you could smash to create additional shortcuts throughout the map itself. Now I guess this ended up becoming the Gauntlet of Siege 3, since it similarly has a punch effect that shoots out and then comes back to you, so I'm guessing that's where the initial inspiration came from. Anyways, after the time expires, the armor would simply break and fall to the ground, but as suspected, it's not a one-time thing either, as this mechanic would have also seen the introduction of diesel fuel, which would have dropped from zombies occasionally as you kill them as a currency, kind of similar to the salvage system seen in modern zombies games. Once you had 5 units of fuel, you'd be able to reactivate the suit and use it again. And that's not all. Everything I've just described is just for the base version of the power armor, as there would have been 3 additional upgrades. The steps you would have taken to do these upgrades aren't detailed, but it is mentioned that they each would have 3 unique quests for them. The first was going to be a damage upgrade. This would have Dragonfire infused the lightning cannon and missile pod weapons, doing more damage as well as adding a damage over time fire effect which stacks for the bigger enemies such as the Mangler and Valkyrie drones. This also would have added a rocket charge melee ability that works the exact same as the rocket shield in Shadows of Evil. Next up, we have an upgrade that adds a grappling hook to your power armor, allowing you to access new areas of the map. And this would have been so cool. We saw it in the campaign, for example, and I'm surprised it didn't make its way in. We eventually saw it in Zombies in Outbreak in Cold War. It's said that this would have functioned the same way as the Beast grapple in Shadows of Evil, which I guess is a good point as well. We, I guess, technically saw the grapple there as well. Finally, we have the third upgrade, which would have doubled the timer, extending the amount of time before the power armor breaks and you would need to collect more fuel to use it again. And last but not least, it's said that this suit would have been required to beat the main boss fight against the dragon and Nikolai, turning it into a mech versus mech fight, which would have been really neat to see. And this goes a bit into what the in-game lore for the suit was going to be, as the suit was made by the Russians from the reverse engineered schematics stolen by Reznov himself that I went over earlier, as a means to combat the dragons being unleashed by the Axis powers during the siege of Stalingrad. So in terms of why this was cut from the map, we don't exactly know, but judging off of the other leaked documents, it most likely either comes down to them hitting memory limits or simply not having enough time to develop it for the map. But what do you think of all of this? And if you want to see more cut content coverage, make sure to stay tuned on the channel as I'll be covering much more, and also make sure to check out COD Lawfag's channel as he intends on covering much more as well. Again, all of the links will be down below. But with that being said, thank you for watching the video. Make sure to subscribe if you're not here for the latest and greatest Call of Duty news and information. So anyways, thank you for watching, and bye.